genuine. The paper that I'm going to present today is more in the form of a report, which was done for an NGO called AMANTrust, and this is about contemporary concerns about migrant workers in Kashmir. And I'm going to begin the paper with a small, the narrative consists of an event. So I'm going to analyze the event and then move on to what is happening in the valley as per migrant workers, and then finally move on to unemployment, migration, criminal, etc. concerns. So the narrative starts in 2007, where following the brutal rape and murder of a 14-year-old schoolgirl, there was spontaneous protest that erupted in Lagate in Kashmir. And Tabinder's body had grave marks of struggle, and the horrifying method with which the crime was committed led to a lot of anger and demand for death sentence of the perpetrators. The case, however, is still dragging on and is largely forgotten by the media. Recently, in November, Syed Ali Shah Gilani reminded the public how the confusion deliberately created by the police has kept the judgment pending. And however, of course, the state government has not missed the opportunity without resolving the case to rename the state award as Tabinder Gandhi State Award for Bravery of Children. Now, the rape was allegedly committed by two Kashmiri men from Lagate, one carpenter from Uttar Pradesh and one cobbler from Rajasthan. The immediate consequence of the protest was the involvement of some Kashmiri leaders, including Gilani, who asked outside workers to leave the state. The Hizbul Mujahideen also gave a week's time for workers to leave Kashmir. These statements were retracted a day later when public criticism followed, and organizations gave a clarification that only criminal elements were asked to leave. The consequence of this was that thousands of migrant workers left the valley immediately out of fear, like lots of buses piled, and almost 20,000 people, according to some news reports, left the valley immediately. It became a political controversy as Hindutva parties quickly scooped up the issue to show the communal nature of the Kashmiri struggle. The Shiv Sena, which of course, like in Maharashtra, along with the MNS, brutally drove away all sorts of migrants, including Bihari migrants, a year later, equated it with the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits in the 1990s. The VHP state unit in Jammu demanded the persecution of Syed Ali Shah Gilani under the National Security Act. BJP member Shahnawaz Hussain turned up in Kashmir to appeal to Kashmiris to not blame all the migrant workers for the crime of some. Ironically, Hussain had to give the example of Americans assuming every Muslim to be a terrorist to drive his point across for the migrant workers. Parties that claim Kashmir to be an inalienable part of Kashmir invoked Kashmirians and Sufi tolerance of Kashmiris for their call. The migrant workers thus became like an edged presence for the Indian political parties to claim their territoriality and uninterrupted mobility in Kashmir as a part of continuous Indian territory, as also an occasion to posture higher morality and secularism. Now, while the reaction of right-wing parties in India, as per this, was more or less predictable, there was a flurry of opinion that followed in Kashmiri local media. And most of this decried the call to oust workers as hurried and unnecessary. Some of the opinion expressed was, however, xenophobic. Some writers in local newspapers termed the migrants as snakes that await the warmth to bite us. The workers also were blamed in several instances as unhygienic scum who indulge in immorality, waywardness, drinking of liquor, besides peddling drugs and acting as army informers. Though no one from Bihar was involved in the crime, many columns blamed the immorality on the slow permeance of Bihari culture in Kashmir. Most of these opinions dubbed this disturbance as unfortunate in a society guided otherwise by religious and moral principles. The immorality of the migrant workers has been in some instances stretched and conflated easily with the ills that beget modernity, and more seriously as a conspiracy to introduce Indian population in Kashmir. Qazi Shah Dalnavi, writing in Greater Kashmir, questioned the... Just open. Maybe some light. Put a chair there or something. So, the immorality of migrant workers was questioned by Qazi Shah Dalnavi, who questioned the logic of some of these statements, asking how the presence of a few lakh migrant workers could threaten Kashmiri culture at large. He also pointed out how the news, otherwise relegated to the inner pages of local newspapers, jumped to the headlines as soon as non-local workers were implicated. Arguing within the columns of the same newspaper, Inayat Chaudhary argued that despite most of the migrant workers being actually poor Muslim workers from parts of UP and other parts of North India, it has been dubbed mostly as an intrigue of Hindus out to destroy the Kashmir economy. Now I'm going to move on to understand how migrant workers have been coming to Kashmir and what sociologically has been their has been the consequence of this transition. Post 2007, migrant workers were returned back to Kashmir in large numbers. They have been a close part of Kashmiri workforce for over 2 decades now. Though there are no statistics on total numbers, some hearsay estimates presume the numbers to be about like 5 lakh workers coming every season in summers to do work on construction industry, bricklaying, local restaurants, etc. Most of them are from UP, Bihar, Bengal and other North Indian states. And they return to their native places once the winter sets in. According to some sources, they've been coming to Kashmir since late 70s. This research has been conducted mostly around Kashmir with the help of numerous interviews during last autumn with migrant workers working in the construction industry, bricklanes, hawkers, in places such as Hawal Chowk and Hyderpura. It can be said that more than half of Srinagar's workforce now consists of migrant workers from other states. Kashmir has been called in some instances as a second girl for its higher wages, good climatic conditions and work opportunities. Actual wages in construction industry, for instance, are much higher than those we find in Delhi. In Delhi we find about 200 for skilled wage, whereas in Kashmir unofficially workers receive about rupees 400 per day, which is a huge change for them. And locals prefer migrant workers since they're seen as more compliant, they are seen as more productive, more skilled. Some interviewees said that since migrant workers don't have to go for namaz, they don't ask for holidays, they're not looking for any excuse to shirk work, so employers usually prefer migrant workers, which is anyway the case mostly in contract work across India. Interviews with migrant workers reveal a different picture than those expressed in the newspaper comments. Most workers have been coming for many years and feel comfortable owing to the friendliness of employers and of the Kashmiri people. They feel more trusted, they're provided with better accommodation, and have almost no reported outwardly tension with the Kashmiri neighborhoods. All the interviewees reported no communal tension either. They also are not Indianized by the local population as easily as by some newspaper commentators, though some of them are quick to claim the nationality themselves. Some of them asserted that they openly cheer for India in cricket matches if they want to without fear of inviting ire. As Khurram Parvez, somebody I interviewed from the Jammu and Kashmir Coalition for Civil Society, though it can't be denied that there's subtle casteism at work in some of the attitudes towards migrant workers, there is, however, no violence in the language of Kashmiris, unlike Delhi's hostility in comparison. It is also to be noted that the ouster of workers in 2007 was more of a localized reaction to the rape rather than a proactive campaign as conducted by communal right-wing parties in India, for example, in Maharashtra. And even this call failed to be heeded seriously by Kashmiris outside of the Handwara constituency in which this call was given. Wazir, a contractor from Bihar, told me that he lives like a local worker here, and whatever disturbances workers face from his area are usually related to supply deficit in work. There is no discontent from Kashmiri workers. All the seeming threats, according to him, were superficially politically motivated. As for 2007, he believed that maybe some sections believe that they are army informers, but this is not a common opinion across the Kashmiri society. However, he added in the end that Bihari ko Bihari hota hai, Hindu ya Muslim nahi, which means that a Bihari worker is just that, he's not defined so much by his religion. While most workers were unaffected by some of the opinions expressed against them, there were some cases where a few were abused and slapped and asked to go back to wherever they came from. Despite no seeming service tension, a local trade union that I talked to, which works with shawl workers and public sector employees, said that they do not want to take unionization work from migrant workers unless it gets the backing of some of the other separated sections. Demographically, it's true that there's been a suspicion that the Indian government, and this has been proved by some scholars, has been counting the army and migrant workers to show revised, reduced number of Kashmiri Muslims to defeat the demand for independence statistically. However, there's been a clear misunderstanding of the reasons for which livelihood for migrant workers takes place. And parallel to this, there have been systematic killings of migrant workers by militants in courts earlier, in which more than 86 workers from different areas have been murdered since about early 2000s. They have not been studied properly, as workers are seen dispensable by both the state and the media. However, like the Chittingspora massacre of Sikhs during Bill Clinton's visit, many of these killings get shrouded in mystery as one approaches the facts closely. In most of these cases, the shootouts were performed by men in combatant uniforms, and there was no clear identity whether they belonged to the army, some locals say that they belong to the renegade militants, which is the Ikhwani section, and some believe that the army has conducted them to milling the armed struggle of the Kashmiris. As Barak Beek has written in New York Times, the people in Kashmir suffer from massacre fatigue. The Kashmiri conflict has a way of boiling truth into vapor, with questions left unanswered about the involvement of militancy and the suspicious role of the state in persisting to color the resistance as Islamist and intolerant. So while the massacre of the Sikhs raised a lot of concern, not much attention has been spared for the workers' killings. These murders have the same confusing quality as the killings of migrant Bihari workers in Assam in 2007, where claims and counterclaims ricocheted between the state and Alpha for manipulating the killings for their respective narratives. The residual uneasiness around the presence of workers can be explained by other factors. There have been campaigns over the years by some local leaders about liquor consumption and AIDS, which points squarely at outside beggars and migrants for introducing such ills in society. The state-directed campaign for AIDS also recruited local imams for the purpose. This also makes me relate it to another point on debate on Kafila that was going on about Reverend Khanna, where Shuddha Sen Gupta had written that in Kashmir sometimes the state appears to be more trying to portray the struggle as more Islamist than it probably is, by saying that by steps such as recruiting local imams for propaganda purposes against AIDS and other. These campaigns initially invoked the presence of impoverished women from other states as the cause behind the spread of sexual diseases. Over time, this became a general assumption about outside labour soiling the social environment and as a threat to an austere society. Wazeer, the migrant worker that I mentioned earlier, was asking me that how come migrant workers are targeted for drinking when many sections in Kashmir drink themselves, and the presence of country liquor is solely blamed on the migrant workforce. A condition that is in fact imposed by employers to accommodate migrant workers is that there will be no liquor consumption allowed on the premises of the building. Another reason for mistrust is perceived threat to community norms. Some Kashmiri workers interviewed emphasized their empathy with the migrant workers, but they also expressed discomfort with recent episodes of intermarriages between Kashmiri women and migrant workers. They also stressed the essential difference between local workers who demand better payment, live better, with no interference in whichever society they work, with what they see in comparison as the docility of migrants who work for less money, often live in degraded conditions, bring down the pay of even the Kashmiri workers, and remarked and also befriend Kashmiri women. In another interview, a worker remarked that it's absolutely impossible for them to interact with local women given their status as workers. However, another worker quipped with a laugh that Kashmiri men flirt rapaciously but to question the intentions of workers. He said if these workers are committed to their women, while he believes that Kashmiri men can't control the distractions. Many of the anxieties thus follow the basic sociological logic of fear to one's culture by contact with another. However, intermingling has only steadily increased since early 1990s. While the presence of migrant workers has colored perceptions on morality and nationality, it has also framed Kashmiri workers in an opposite light. Native Kashmiri workers are seen, in some of the interviews that I had with professors, journalists, etc., they're seen as lazy and ayash, disinterested to work. There have been various injunctions over the years that have juxtaposed the leisure-seeking mentality of Kashmiris to the productivity of outside labor workers, and Kashmiri workers are seen to be harboring a sort of dependency syndrome. Though the populist reactions have conflated the perception of lack of hygiene with immorality and disease, the elite sections of professors, etc., have framed the discomfort in rational economic terms of economic besiegement. The fear is the loss of finance through remittances that workers send to their native states. Some reactions suggest regulation of the workforce through state mechanisms. One journalist interviewed also expressed fear that Kashmiris will soon lose hold over the economy as migrant workers might soon be found working even on handlooms and shawls. This perception frames local workers as losing out with a laid-back attitude, forgetting in the last instance that the lack of opportunities for skill enhancement has not been available to them. Now, unemployment has been a deep concern in Kashmir. There have been several programs for middle-class youth to get engaged in the economy in both public sector and private sector. However, there have been no programs even by its ascribed logic where the state blames the cause of militancy on unemployment quite easily. The state has not done much to stem unemployment and lack of work opportunities for unorganized workers and especially artisans. The public sector in Kashmir consumes most of the resources. As another interviewee called Isman Oman helped me phrase it, he said that the state governments have always promised salaries and not services. I won't go into detail about Kashmir's economic problems here, but it can be said that after the land reforms, there have been no substantive changes for the rural economy, as the urban bias ensures that Srinagar grows at the cost of the rural hinterland, which due to the central government's biased water policy, etc., suffers from improper housing and lack of basic services. Given the pressure on land and limited employment avenues in public and private sector, the migrant worker is seen by some sections as a physical manifestation of loss of both income and opportunities for local Kashmiris. Though the sentiment is also quickly blamed on the younger generation for the disinclination for physical work, various interviews from civil society profess distress over how young Kashmiris are ready to work in the private sector but are not interested in menial work or manual labor anymore. The burgeoning Kashmiri middle class, with its increased literacy and ambition, has been opting for occupational mobility wherever possible. Given its different desires, it is unlikely that the migrant workers would be envied any further on the question of remittances. But it also means that the labour question might not be able to snatch itself out of the attached residues of economy or nationality and may be able to be an independent area of concern for either the migrant workers or the Kashmiri workers, unless perhaps the Kashmiri independence struggle approaches it distantly away from the ambit of morality and its infringement. Some hope in this regard is provided by recent opposition to Sharia court's call to expel 4 pastors in Kashmir by some separatist leaders such as Gilani himself, who maintain that expelling people will not help resolve the issue. Kashmiri politics has also been more flexible to introspection than other such movements. However, informal work in Kashmir's economy has not received much attention in terms of either activism or research. The Bihari construction workers, while defending themselves against accusations of siding with the police or the army, also emphasize emphatically how both migrants and Kashmiri workers have no recourse in case employers cheat them of their payments. Besides this, the worrying pursuit of morality and the ascription of immorality to outside workers also regresses the movements about foundation distance from the sort of bureaucratic nationalism that Indian state has seen. I'm going to end this by just putting across a few questions that, how does the figure of migrant worker, who's seen as a threat to both the economy and the social fabric of the society, how do we read it against this, narrative of sub-nationalism? And how does the local worker with both his foreign habits and his efficiency is seen as a figure of disturbance, morally against what is seen as a simple society oblique traditional economy? And secondly, how do we see independent labour concerns in any sort of conflict area? How do we understand immorality, aversion to work, which is of course always ascribed to migrant labourers? But also, how do we cleave between nationalism, state and migrant workers in this regard? So that's for all of you to answer. I would also like to thank AMANTrust for funding the study, and the person that I worked with, Sajjad Hussain, could not be here. He helped me with the field research, so I just would like to thank him.
Thanks, Rashmi, for what is clearly a very provocative presentation, even if it is somewhat preliminary, and I'm glad you started by saying that this was in the nature of a report that you wrote for the AMANTrust. It holds the promise of many lines of investigation, and I hope that it can be taken forward in some productive ways.